Okay, so in the last video, we fixed up the base piece and we also created a cap along the bottom. We looked at creating a planar trim shape. We also looked at creating a new loft and a boundary for the interior section, which essentially broke the bottom up into 5 pieces, but allowed me to get a grid flow which starts to match what we see on the actual base. Now, for our purposes, either method is actually going to be okay, since a bishop really isn't going to deform. But the structure that you see here is actually going to be more correct, technically, because this really starts to speak to some of the more articulate animation concepts for NURBS patch modeling. Well, what I have to do from that last video still is actually organize some of these pieces. And I'm actually going to select all 5 of my bottom cap parts. I don't think we really need to name each one of these, but if I hit Control-G to group them and rename this base underscore cap, I think then we have a logical selection group here that we can work with. If I just drag that base cap into the bishop group, right-click on base cap and collapse it, I think we've got a pretty intuitive selection. Base cap, base, and the bishop as a whole. Well, in this next step, I'm going to turn the grid back on. In this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to try and create the stem of the bishop, which goes up, goes in and out a little bit, and rounds up right next to the head, or the little hat part of the bishop. To create the stem, what I'm going to do is use a NURBS curve to draw out my profile. And then I'm going to revolve that curve. To draw out the curve itself, I'm going to go to my curves shelf. And I actually have several options to work with here. We can also see some of these options in the Create tab with the CV curve tool, the EP curve tool, and the pencil curve tool. Well, I'm going to be drawing this from my front camera view. So I'm going to make sure I go into the front camera view by hitting spacebar, entering that front view, and I'll hit 5 to show this in smooth shaded. The tools that we have available here, we have, first of all, this arc curve tool, which allows me to create 3 points to help define an arc. And that can be somewhat useful for creating circular shapes, but in our case, really isn't going to be useful for us. So I'm going to delete that out. We have the pencil curve tool, working our way left on the shelf. With this, I can actually just draw a silhouette, and I can have a curve. One thing you'll notice about this curve, though, if I right-click on it and choose Control Vertex, you'll see how many sort of like hundreds of vertices we actually have here. I can check just how many I have by opening up the attribute editor, and you can see I actually have spans listed as 33 individual spans. That's roughly 33 vertices that we have here. That's not nearly going to be efficient enough for me. The final tool that we have, the EP curve tool, is a sort of a N-shaped curve with little plus signs along it, which you can find on your curve shelf. With this tool, I'm actually able to click and just draw out points just where I need them. And what I'm going to try and do is trace my way up this form to this overhang, build my way around, and then finish up this little head piece. So let me click, and I'm just clicking, and as long as I hold down, I can still choose where to put that vertex point. I'll make another one for a corner. If I'm trying to create any corner, one thing that you want to see is that any line that you create, since it's curved, is going to go across 3 vertices. So if I want to create a really tightly defined corner, I should try and put 2 vertices pretty close to each other. I'll go out a little bit here. I'm actually going to create a new little overhang before I go up, just to give it a little bit of style. And work my way up this body, which I'll sort of pull together. Now you want to try and keep this a little bit away from the center line, because getting right on that center line is going to create too thin of a stem. And I will make a corner and another little overhang. And it's okay if this isn't perfect when you're doing it. And I will round my way back up. And I think that's going to be a pretty good spot to get something that works for a bishop. And I will hit enter. And there is my curve. Now this, if I check the attribute editor, only has 17 spans, roughly half the number of spans. And if I right-click and examine the control vertices, then I can see the placement of those vertices. I want to edit these a little bit because it looks a little too loopy for my taste. I also see here, I want to try and get each of these vertices so that there's sort of a clear jump between these sections. I don't want there to be any sort of jagged connection when I create my surface fillet, which we're going to do next. So I'm going to grab the move tool, and you see I'm just inching these points around to try and create a more accurate connection for each of them. I'll pull these points forward just a bit to taper them more. There we go. Producing a little bit more rounding in the corner now. And let's actually round this section out a little bit by moving these vertices at the corners. You just have to look for the correct vertex to do this. There's my rounded section. I'll move that down. Move this one up. And we're almost complete. So there we go. I think with those couple manipulations, we've now got a really nice profile wrapped around this section. To finish this up, I'm going to select this curve, and I'm going to revolve it by going to Surfaces, Revolve, and I will hit 3 to establish this. And now you'll notice from just that curve, I've created that whole stem by revolving it around the center axis. I'm going to show you in the Revolve tool options, we actually have several axes to choose from. You're going to want to make sure your axis is set to Y, because if I choose the X-axis or the Z-axis, you can clearly see those are the wrong choices. So Y is what we're after. Hit 3 to keep this round. And I'm going to go in my hypergraph, rename this revolved surface as stem, and I'll add that to my bishop group. And I'll take my curve and add that to the construction curves. I'll save out my scene file and delete my history, and I think we're in a pretty good spot.